The stagecoach lurched to a halt, wheels groaning against frozen mud. Samantha Bell pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window, watching dust pine materialize through December's snow like a watercolor left in the rain. The driver's end of the line cut through wind that had followed them down from Montana, sharp as broken glass. She gathered her carpetbag and stepped down, boots finding purchase on ground that crackled with ice. The hem of her traveling dress, practical wool dyed the color of dried sage, swept aside fresh snow. At 5 feet 11 inches, she had to duck slightly as she emerged, a motion so familiar it had worn grooves in her pride. The driver hauled her trunk down with a grunt. "Sure this is your stop. Miss ain't much here but cattle and regret." "It'll do," Samantha said, counting coins into his palm. 29 years had taught her that most places held both in equal measure. He shook his head, climbing back to his perch. "Well, Merry Christmas to you, I suppose, though I'd say Denver would have been merrier." The stagecoach pulled away, leaving her standing beside her trunk on what passed for Dust Pine's Main Street. A collection of weathered buildings huddled against the wind. Murphy's General Store, the Broken Spoke Saloon, a barber shop with windows so dirty she couldn't see inside. At the far end, a church steeple pointed accusingly at the gray sky. Men lounged against the saloon's porch posts despite the cold, passing a bottle between mittened hands. One whistled low and long when he spotted her. Another laughed. Well, Christmas came early. Boys. Samantha kept her spine straight, her gray eyes fixed on the middle distance. In Billings, she'd have snapped back. In Helena, she'd tried smiling politely. In Bozeman, she'd ignored them entirely. Each strategy had ended the same way. "Miss Bell, we feel you're unsettling our customers. Your presence is too bold for a respectable establishment." The last dismissal had come from Mrs. Hartley's dress shop in Deer Lodge, after Samantha had suggested a customer might prefer a different collar style. "You tower over the ladies," Mrs. Hartley had said, not meeting her eyes. "It makes them uncomfortable. And that mouth of yours, always with opinions nobody asked for." The inheritance letter had arrived 2 days later, like Providence in an envelope. Great-Aunt Millicent, whom Samantha had met exactly once at age 7, had left her the storage room property in Dust Pine, Wyoming. It wasn't much. The lawyer's letter made that clear, but it was somewhere to go when everywhere else had closed its doors. A gust of wind drove ice crystals against her cheek. She needed to find this storage room before the weather worsened. According to the lawyer's description, it sat behind the abandoned Holbrook Tannery on the north edge of town. "You lost sugar." One of the saloon men had wandered closer, breath sour with whiskey. "Happy to help a lady find her way." "No." The word came out flat as hammered iron. She'd learned economy with words. Men like this viewed conversation as invitation. "Now that ain't friendly." He reached for her trunk. "Let me just—" She stepped between him and her belongings. "I said no." Something in her tone, or maybe her height, looking down at him from 2 inches above, made him step back. Forget it. Probably one of them suffragettes anyway. He retreated to his friends, muttering about unnatural women. Samantha hefted her trunk. 3 blocks north, past buildings that grew shabbier with each step. She found the Holbrook Tannery. Its windows were boarded, walls still bearing the ghost of painted letters. An alley ran alongside, disappearing into shadows and snow. Behind the tannery, as promised, stood a small structure that optimistic souls might call a cabin. Realistic ones would call it what it was, a storage shed with pretensions. The door hung slightly crooked, and gaps between the wall boards would let in wind, snow, and anything else that cared to visit. The key from the lawyer's packet scraped in the lock. Inside, dust motes danced in what light squeezed through the cracks. A narrow bed with a straw mattress occupied one wall. A pot-bellied stove squatted in the corner like a cast-iron toad. A table, 2 chairs, and shelves that had seen better decades completed the inventory. Samantha set down her trunk and surveyed her kingdom. In the last 18 months, she'd been turned out of 7 positions in 5 towns. Her crime was always the same, existing too largely, speaking too plainly, refusing to shrink herself into acceptable dimensions. "It needs work," she said aloud, testing her voice against the walls. They didn't seem to mind its tone. She spent the remaining daylight making the space barely livable. The stove, miracle of miracles, drew properly once she cleared a bird's nest from the chimney pipe. Her trunk yielded 2 wool blankets, saved from better days, and her sewing kit, the one thing no employer had been able to fault. Samantha Bell might be too tall, too outspoken, too much of everything, but she could make stitches dance. By the time darkness fell, she'd managed to create a small circle of warmth around the stove. The oil lamp she'd found on a shelf sputtered to life, casting shadows that made the room seem larger than it was. She sat at the table with bread and hard cheese from her traveling supplies, listening to wind howl between the boards. The lamp flickered once, twice. On the 3rd time, it died entirely. Darkness rushed in like water through a dam break. The wind found every gap in the walls, turning her sanctuary into a sieve. The stove's glow provided the only light, painting the frost of her breath orange. A knock at the door made her freeze. 3 measured raps, neither aggressive nor timid. Who would be calling on a storage shed behind an abandoned tannery after dark? She thought of the men at the saloon, liquid courage turning to liquid plans. "Who is it?" Her voice carried the edge she'd honed in too many towns. "Someone who's lived through dust pine winters." A man's voice, low and steady, not slurred with drink. She stayed seated. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you, ma'am. Got something for you, if you'll take it." Samantha weighed options. The door had a bar, but it was old wood that wouldn't stop determined trouble. Better to face whatever this was head on. She lifted the bar and opened the door a hand's width. A tall figure stood in the snow, hat pulled low, collar turned up against the wind. She couldn't make out features in the darkness, just the solid shape of him against the starlight. He held something in his arms. "Firewood," he said, lifting his burden slightly. "Dry stuff. That wet pine you're burning won't last the night." "I didn't ask for charity." "Didn't offer any. This is, call it dust pine courtesy. Nobody freezes their first night if we can help it." He set the wood down on the doorstep, movements careful and deliberate. "There's kindling in the middle, wrapped in oilcloth. Should catch quick." He touched his hat brim and turned to go. "Wait!" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why?" He paused, but didn't turn back. "Because cold don't care if you're ready for it or not. Welcome to Dust Pine, miss." She watched him disappear into the swirling snow. When she finally looked down, she saw he'd been true to his word. Split oak and pine, dry as summer bones. In the center, wrapped in oilcloth as promised, kindling and even a few matches. Samantha brought the wood inside, rebuilt her fire with an oak that burned hot and steady. The room warmed, shadows softening their edges. She thought about the stranger's footprints, already filling with new snow, and wondered if kindness always came wrapped in winter dark. Outside, the wind howled its old song, but inside, for the first time in 18 months, Samantha Bell sat warm in a place that, however humble, was hers. Tomorrow would bring whatever tomorrow brought. Tonight, she had walls that didn't judge her height, a fire that didn't care about her opinions, and the memory of an unexpected grace. She pulled her shawl closer and began planning. The room needed work, yes, but she'd brought her needles, her thread, and her stubborn refusal to disappear. Dust pine might be the end of the line, but sometimes that's exactly where new stories begin. In the morning, she'd see about turning this storage room into something more, but for now, she fed oak to the flames and watched shadows dance on walls that were, finally, hers to claim. The oak burned low by midnight. Samantha had been trying to read by its glow, a worn copy of Godey's Lady's Book from 2 years past. when the wind shifted, driving snow through the gaps in the walls like flour through a sifter. The temperature dropped so sudden and sharp she could feel it in her teeth. She fed the last piece of oak to the stove, watched it catch and flare. An hour, maybe 2, and she'd be back to burning whatever she could find. The thought of venturing out into the storm for wood set a stone of dread in her stomach. She'd survived worse nights, but never in a place so foreign, so stripped of even the pretense of comfort. The knock, when it came, was different from before. Softer, almost hesitant. 3 taps, then silence, as if the knocker was giving her time to decide. Samantha rose, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. Through the door's cracks, she glimpsed the same tall silhouette from hours earlier, the stranger who'd brought wood. "It's the woodman," he said, and she could hear something like amusement in the low rumble of his voice. "Got something else you might need." She lifted the bar, opened the door wider this time. Snow swirled between them, catching in the lamplight from the stove's open grate. He stood with his hat pulled low, collar high, but she could make out a strong jaw. Stubbled with several days' growth, his eyes remained shadowed. In his hands another armload of wood, and balanced on top, a bundle wrapped in burlap. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim with one finger. "Figured that first load wouldn't last. This cold's meaner than usual." "I can't pay you." The words came out harder than intended, shame sharpening their edges. "Don't recall asking for payment." He set the wood just inside her door, movements careful not to cross the threshold uninvited. "The bundle's got some coffee, bit of salt pork, biscuits from this morning. Nothing fancy." "Why?" She pulled the blanket tighter. "You don't know me." "No, ma'am, I don't." He straightened, and she realized he was taller than her by several inches, a rare enough occurrence that it made her blink. "But I know hungry, and I know cold. That's enough for one night." He turned to go, then paused. "Name's Colt Riggs. Run horses up at the North Ranch. You need anything, send word with Jimmy at the general store. He'll find me." "I won't need anything." The response was automatic, practiced. He studied her for a moment, and the stove's light caught his eyes, gray-green, like sage after rain. "No shame in needing, ma'am, only shames in letting pride freeze you solid." Then he was gone, footprints filling with snow before she'd even closed the door. Samantha stared at the provisions. The coffee was real, not chicory substitute. The salt pork was generous, well wrapped. The biscuits, when she unwrapped one, were only a day old at most, a luxury in a frontier town. She built up the fire with the new wood, set coffee to brewing in her small pot. The familiar ritual steadied her hands, gave them something to do besides shake with cold and something else, the vertigo of unexpected kindness. She'd learned early that kindness came with strings. In Chicago, where she'd grown up, the ward boss's generosity meant votes owed. In the towns she'd fled through, men's kindness meant expectations, usually delivered with whiskey breath and grasping hands. But this Colt Riggs had crossed no threshold, made no lingering looks, asked for nothing but that she survive the night. The coffee was strong, bitter, perfect. She sat at her rickety table, hands wrapped around the tin cup, and planned. Tomorrow she'd visit the general store, see about credit against future sewing work. She'd need needle stock, thread, fabric samples if they had them. She'd turn this storage room into a shop, modest but clean. Let the town talk about the too tall woman who'd moved into the shed behind the tannery. Talk died down eventual, but good stitching spoke forever. Morning came pale and frozen. The storm had blown itself out, leaving dust pine wrapped in white like a bride, if brides came weather-worn and slightly crooked. Samantha broke her fast on biscuit and salt pork, dressed in her most respectable wool brown, severe but well-made, and ventured into town. Murphy's General Store squatted on Main Street like a prosperous toad, windows actually clean, sign freshly painted. A bell jangled as she entered, and warmth hit her face like a blessing. The place smelled of coffee, leather, and the peculiar mixture of goods that made general stores the heart of frontier towns. "Help you?" The proprietor, presumably Murphy himself, was a compact man with spectacular mutton chops and suspicious eyes. "I need to establish credit." She kept her voice steady, businesslike. "Against future earnings. I'm a seamstress, setting up shop." His eyes traveled up to her face, a long journey. "You're the one moved into Holbrook's old storage." News traveled fast in Dustpine. "Yes. Heard you came from Montana way." "Yes. Heard you got run out of 7 towns for being troublesome." That was impressive, even for frontier gossip. She'd only told the stagecoach driver about 3. "I was dismissed from positions for offering opinions on garment construction and refusing to tolerate improper advances. If that's troublesome, then yes, I'm troublesome." Murphy studied her for a long moment, then barked a laugh. "Lord knows this town could use more troublesome women. My Ethel's been carrying that banner alone too long." He pulled out a ledger. "What do you need?" They spent an hour negotiating. Murphy was fair but firm. Credit extended on promise of work completed. Interest reasonable for the territories. She left with thread, needles, a small selection of fabric for samples, and something more valuable, the knowledge that Jimmy, the stock boy with the lazy eye, was indeed the one to carry messages. "You need to reach someone outside town," Murphy said as she gathered her purchases. "Jimmy's your man. Knows everyone from here to Cheyenne. Seems like—" She thought of Colt Riggs, of gray-green eyes and careful distances kept. "I'll remember that." The walk back to her shed-turned shop was bitter cold but bearable in daylight. She passed few people, a woman hustling 2 children toward the church, a man loading a wagon with deliberate slowness. None spoke to her, but the looks were measuring rather than hostile. She existed in that space newcomers occupied, neither welcomed nor rejected, but watched. Her room looked smaller in daylight, shabbier, but also full of possibility. She spent the afternoon cleaning with snow melt heated on the stove, scrubbing years of dust from the shelves, patching the worst gaps in the walls with rags and hope. By evening, she'd transformed one corner into something approaching a workspace table cleared, fabric samples arranged, thread organized by color and weight. She was hemming a sample skirt simple calico, but with stitches so fine they seemed to disappear into the fabric. When the knock came, full dark had fallen, and she'd been working by the light of her new oil lamp, purchased on credit and dear as diamonds. "Who is it?" But she already knew. Something about the rhythm of those knocks was becoming familiar. "Colt Riggs, ma'am, with supper, if you'll have it." She opened the door to find him standing in fresh snow, holding a covered pot that steamed in the cold air. Behind him, she glimpsed a horse, patient and dark against the white ground. "Mrs. Murphy sent stew," he said. "Seemed to think you might be too busy setting up shop to cook proper." Her words, not mine. The stew smelled of beef and onions, prosperity and kindness. That's very generous. Please thank her for me." "Thank her yourself. Sunday after church. She holds court at the social hour, terrorizes the gossips, and recruits for her causes. You'll like her." He set the pot on her doorstep. "She also sent word that 3 women have already asked about hiring a seamstress. Seems the last one left town 6 months back, and ladies are getting desperate for decent needlework." Hope flared in her chest, warm as the stew's steam. "Did she say who?" "The banker's wife, the minister's daughter, and Widow Pearson, who runs the boarding house." He touched his hat brim, began to turn away. "Wait." The word came easier this time. Would you like some coffee? I can't eat all this stew myself, and it's cold to ride back to the North Ranch without something warm." He paused, and she could see him weighing propriety against the cold, against something else she couldn't name. "I'd be obliged," he said finally, "if you're certain it's no trouble." She stepped back, let him enter. He removed his hat immediately. revealed dark hair that needed cutting and that weather-worn face she'd only glimpsed before. Not handsome in the classical sense. His nose had been broken at least once, and a scar ran through his left eyebrow. But there was something solid about him, like he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains. He took the chair she indicated, folding his long frame carefully, keeping his hands visible on the table. She recognized the gesture, a man showing he meant no threat, that he understood the rules of visiting an unmarried woman, even one living in a converted storage shed. They ate in companionable silence at first, sharing the stew from her 2 bowls, the coffee from her 2 cups. The domesticity of it should have felt strange, dangerous even. Instead, it felt like coming in from a long cold. "You're not from here," she said eventually. "Your accent? Texas." "Born there. Haven't been back in 15 years. He broke a biscuit carefully, precisely. "Dustpine's home now." "Why here?" He considered the question. "Honest work, good horses, sky that goes on forever." A pause. "People who let you be who you've become, not who you were." The words hit her chest like thrown stones. "And who were you?" "Someone who needed to learn the difference between fighting and defending." He touched the scar on his eyebrow absently. "Took some time to figure that out." They finished the meal as the wind picked up outside, rattling the boards she'd tried to patch. When he rose to leave, she found herself reluctant to see him go. Not from loneliness. She'd grown comfortable with that bitter friend, but from the strange peace of shared silence with someone who understood the weight of elsewhere. "I'll bring more wood tomorrow," he said, settling his hat. "That north wall needs proper patching, too. I'll bring some boards, if you'll allow it." Pride warred with practicality. Practicality for once won. "I'd be grateful." He touched his hat brim again, that gesture she was beginning to recognize as his signature. At the door, he paused. "Samantha Bell," he said, and she realized she'd never told him her full name. Small towns and their swift tongues. "That's a name that stands straight. Suits you." Then he was gone, swallowed by darkness and snow, leaving her with empty bowls and a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. She cleaned the dishes, banked the fire, prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring those 3 women seeking needlework, the beginning of her attempt to carve out a place in Dustpine. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment to think of gray-green eyes and careful kindness, of a man who brought wood and food but took nothing, not even the weight of obligation. Outside, his horse's hoofbeats faded toward the North Ranch. Inside, Samantha Bell sat in her patched-together kingdom and began to stitch a future from the salvage of her past, one perfect seam at a time. The banker's wife arrived first, rustling through Samantha's door in taffeta and disapproval. "Mrs." Adelaide Harrington stood 4 feet 11 inches in her heeled boots and looked at Samantha like she was measuring a mountain she hadn't expected to climb. "Hey, Mrs. Murphy insisted you were competent," she said, the word insisted carrying the weight of significant doubt. "I need 3 day dresses taken in, since, having my youngest, nothing fits properly." Samantha kept her face neutral, professional. "Of course, if you'll step behind the screen, I'll take measurements." The screen was news sheets strung on rope, but clean and proper. The workspace had transformed in 2 weeks. Colt had been true to his word, arriving with boards and silent efficiency to patch the walls. The room still bore its humble origins, but now it whispered respectability rather than shouting desperation. "Mrs." Harrington emerged from behind the screen 20 minutes later, pinned and measured and slightly less skeptical. "You're stitching," she said, examining the sample work displayed on the shelves. "It's quite fine." "Thank you." Samantha made notes in her ledger. Another credit purchase that would be paid once word of her work spread. "The dresses will be ready Thursday." "We'll see." But something had shifted in the banker's wife's tone. "I suppose Murphy's wife was right. Again. Lord knows that woman usually is." "After she left, Samantha allowed herself a small smile. One customer, one chance to prove herself. She'd make those seams sing. The work came steady after that. The minister's daughter needed her wedding dress altered, a task that would have gone to Denver if Samantha hadn't been there. Widow Pearson brought curtains for the boarding house, practical muslin that needed hemming. Each job completed on time, each stitch perfect. Each customer leaving slightly surprised that the too-tall woman from Montana could make fabric obey like a trained dog. It was the third week when the package arrived. Jimmy from the general store knocked just after noon, grinning his crooked grin. "Delivery for you, Miss Bell, from the North Ranch." The package was wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, inside a leather packet of the finest English needles, sharp as promises and dear as gold. The note was written in a careful hand. "They tear faster than I can fix. You sew better than we deserve. See." Samantha stared at the needles, then at the note. Outside the package, Jimmy had left a flour sack full of work clothes, shirts missing buttons, pants torn at the knees, a leather vest with a rip clean down the side. Ranch work, hard used and honestly earned. She spread the clothes on her table, assessing damage like a doctor with patience. Good fabric, sturdy construction, but neglected. How long had the men at the North Ranch been making do with tears and missing buttons? The vest intrigued her most. The leather was quality, well-tanned and supple despite its age. The rip had been caused by something sharp wire, maybe, or a horn. It would need careful work to repair without leaving an obvious mend. She worked through the afternoon, losing herself in the rhythm of needle and thread. This was different from ladies' dresses and curtains. This was preservation of things that mattered, that did real work in the world. When she finally finished as darkness fell, she had a neat pile of mended clothes and hands that ached with satisfaction. The next morning, she gave the bundle to Jimmy with instructions to deliver it to the North Ranch. 2 days later, another package arrived. More clothes, more tears, more evidence of hard work and harder living. No note this time. Just the clothes and their silent stories. This became their pattern through the warming weeks of late winter. Packages of mending from the North Ranch returned promptly, paid for promptly. Colt Riggs apparently believed in settling accounts. She began to recognize individual garments, the blue shirt that always tore at the same shoulder seam, the canvas pants that attracted thorns like a magnet, the vest that seemed to be his favorite despite its tendency to lose buttons. She never asked Jimmy about the men at the ranch, but information came anyway. As it did in small towns, 5 hands worked the North Ranch, running horses for the Army, breaking Mustangs for settlers. Colt Riggs had rebuilt the operation after a fire in '83, the same fire that killed the previous owner. He'd bought the land fair from the widow, kept on the hands who'd survived, made it profitable through will and skill with horses. Best horseman in 3 territories. Murphy mentioned one day when she came for supplies. Quiet about it, though. Not like that Harlan Gates who owns the big spread south, all flash and no substance. That one. Samantha filed the information away, concentrated on her stitching. March arrived with false promises of spring. The snow melted, revealing dust pine in all its muddy glory, then froze again overnight, turning streets to skating rinks. It was during one of these thaw-freeze cycles that the church social was announced. First Saturday of April, celebrating Easter and the real arrival of spring. "You'll come," Ethel Murphy informed her, not asking. "Wear something that shows off that needlework of yours. Half the town still thinks you're some kind of fallen woman. Living alone in that shed, time to show them different." Samantha wanted to refuse. Socials meant scrutiny, judgment, all the things that had driven her from town after town. But Ethel Murphy had been kind, had sent customers her way. Refusal would be ungrateful. She spent evenings after her regular work making herself a dress. Navy wool, severe in cut but perfect in construction. Every seam was a declaration, every button a small rebellion. She might be the too-tall woman living in a converted storage shed, but she'd be impeccably dressed while doing it. The night before the social, a package arrived. Not mending this time, a length of ivory lace, delicate as frost, expensive as sin. The note read, "For the collar. If you want, see." She held the lace to the lamplight, watching shadows play through its patterns. How had he known she'd been trying to decide how to soften the severe neckline? How had he guessed she'd been weighing propriety against the desire to show these people she was more than competent, stitching in sharp words? She worked until midnight, attaching the lace with stitches so fine they disappeared. The effect transformed the dress, still proper, still modest, but now with a whisper of beauty at the throat. She hung it carefully, lay down in her narrow bed, and tried not to think about gray-green eyes and the kind of man who noticed what was missing. The social was held in the church hall, a room that tried hard to be festive with paper flowers and enthusiasm. Samantha arrived precisely on time, not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to seem afraid. She'd pinned her dark hair in a style that added height rather than diminishing it, spine straight as a measuring stick. Conversation stuttered when she entered. She was used to that, the recalculation people did when faced with a woman who looked them level in the eye, or, more often, looked down. But Ethel Murphy was there immediately, arm linked through Samantha's, voice carrying clear as a bell. "There's our seamstress, ladies. Have you seen her work, Adelaide? Show off those dresses she altered. Fit like they were made for you now, don't they?" And bless her, Adelaide Harrington actually smiled. "Indeed, best work I've seen outside of Chicago." The evening progressed in careful stages. Introduction, assessment, gradual acceptance. Samantha spoke when spoken to, smiled when appropriate. Let her work speak through the women wearing her alterations. She was performing respectability like a play she'd memorized, and the audience seemed willing to believe it. She'd found a quiet spot near the back wall, catching her breath between acts. When the hall door opened, 5 men entered, bringing the smell of leather and horses and open sky. She recognized none of them, but something in the way they moved, careful, respectful, but not apologetic for their presence, marked them as ranch hands. The last through the door made her breath catch. Colt Riggs in work clothes was one thing. Colt Riggs in his Sunday best clean white shirt, dark vest, pants that actually fit properly was something else entirely. He'd trimmed his hair, shaved close, revealed the strong lines of his face without the softening of stubble. He looked both younger and older, more dangerous and more careful. His eyes found hers across the room. A nod. The touch of fingers to hat brim, even though he wasn't wearing one. Then Ethel Murphy descended on the ranch hands like a mother hen, clucking about them finally showing up to a social. Had they eaten? Did they know how to dance proper? Samantha turned back to the wall, studying a particularly uninteresting piece of plaster. The lace at her throat felt suddenly too warm, too noticeable. She'd worn it. She'd used his gift, incorporated it into her armor, and now he'd seen and... "Miss Bell." His voice came from directly behind her, low enough that only she could hear. She turned, had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. The novelty of that hadn't worn off. "Mr. Riggs!" "That lace suits you." Simple statement, but his eyes held something warmer. "Though I'd guess everything you make suits you." It was a generous gift. Too generous. "Was clearing out my mother's things last month. Been in a trunk since she passed. Seemed wrong to let it sit in darkness when it could be doing what it was made for." He paused. "Dancing starting soon." She could hear the fiddle tuning up, couples beginning to form on the cleared floor. "I don't dance." "Neither do I. Much. But Ethel Murphy will have my hide if I don't ask you, and yours if you don't accept. She's got plans. That woman." Despite herself, Samantha smiled. "She's not subtle, is she?" "As a sledgehammer." He offered his arm. Formal and proper. "One dance to keep the peace." She should refuse, should stay by the safe wall. maintained the careful distance that had kept her reputation intact through 7 towns and as many dismissals. But the lace whispered at her throat, and his eyes held no judgment, and she was tired of performing safety. One dance. They moved onto the floor as the fiddle launched into a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, hers on his shoulder, and for the first time in her life, Samantha Bell danced with a man without feeling like she was looming over him. They fit. Her height and his, her strength and his, 2 people who'd learned to take up space without apology. "You fixed the vest," he said as they moved. "Can't even see where it tore." That's the point of good mending, to make the damage disappear. Sometimes the mending makes things stronger than they were before. She looked at him then. Really looked. The scar through his eyebrow, the careful way he held her, the steadiness of his gaze. Sometimes. They finished the dance in silence, moving together like they'd been doing this longer than 3 minutes in a church hall. When the music ended, he stepped back, bowed slightly. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Bell, and for the mending. My men think you're some kind of miracle worker." "Just needle and thread, Mr. Riggs. Nothing miraculous about it. Depends on what's being stitched back together." He left her with that, moving back to his men, leaving her by the wall with her heart hammering and the lace at her throat feeling like a brand. She stayed for another hour, spoke when spoken to, smiled when required, but her mind kept circling back to those few minutes on the dance floor, to the weight of a hand at her waist and words that meant more than they said. Walking home in the cold spring darkness, Samantha Bell allowed herself to think dangerous thoughts about men who brought wood and warmth without asking for payment, about careful distances maintained and careful gifts given, about what it might mean to stop running, to stop shrinking, to let someone see her at full height and not flinch away. The lace at her throat caught moonlight as she unlocked her door. Inside, everything waited as she'd left it: workspace, narrow bed, life constructed from salvage and stubbornness. But something had shifted in the church hall, in the space of a waltz and a conversation about mending. She hung the navy dress carefully, fingers lingering on the lace. Tomorrow would bring more work, more careful construction of reputation and place. But tonight, she let herself remember the feeling of dancing eye to eye with someone who didn't want her smaller. Tonight, that was enough. The church social should have been a triumph. By Monday, 3 new customers had come calling, ladies who'd seen Samantha's needlework on display. By Wednesday, she had more orders than she could complete in a week. But success in Dust Pine came with its own sharp edges. "That Bell woman," she heard Mrs. Harrington saying in Murphy's store, not bothering to lower her voice. "Dancing with that rancher like she had the right, no shame at all." Samantha kept her eyes on the thread selection, fingers steady as she chose colors. Let them talk. She'd heard worse in 7 towns. But Dust Pine was different. Dust Pine had Harlan Gates. He appeared in her doorway on Thursday afternoon, filling it with expensive clothes and assumptions. 35, widowed, owner of the largest cattle spread south of town, the kind of man who expected the world to rearrange itself for his convenience. "Miss Bell." He removed his hat with a flourish that made her teeth ache. "I believe we haven't been properly introduced." "No, we haven't." She didn't invite him in, kept her hands visible on her work. A half-finished dress for the minister's wife lay across her table, pins bristling like porcupine quills. "I'm Harlan Gates. I own the Double G Ranch." He waited, clearly expecting recognition, appreciation, something more than her flat stare. "I understand you're new in town, from Montana." "Yes. Must be difficult, establishing yourself alone. A woman needs protection in a place like this." The word slithered between them, oily with implication. Samantha had heard this song before, knew all its verses. "I manage quite well, Mr. Gates." Still, he leaned against her doorframe, proprietary. "I could use someone with your skills at the Double G. My late wife's things need tending. Good wages, proper accommodations. Better than this. His gesture encompassed her workshop, her home, her carefully built independence. I prefer working for myself. His smile thinned. Pride's an expensive luxury for a woman alone. So is dependence on men who think kindness comes with conditions. The words hung in the air like drawn weapons. Gates straightened, color rising in his face. You'd do well to reconsider. Miss Bell, Dust Pine's a small town. Reputation matters.
Yes,
she said quietly.
it does.
After he left, she locked the door and leaned against it, hands shaking. She'd just made an enemy of the richest man in the territory, in Montana. That would have meant packing by nightfall. But she looked around her workshop, at the orders waiting, the fabrics sorted, the life she'd stitched together from nothing, and felt something new. Not fear, but resolve. That evening, Colt's weekly package arrived, the usual mending, but at the bottom, wrapped separate, was the blue shirt she recognized as his favorite. The note pinned to it was brief. Heard Gates visited. This needs fixing. So does his attitude. She examined the shirt, found the tear small, easily mended, but beneath it, folded, careful, was a second note. Some men think owning land means owning people. Don't let him... Samantha pressed the note flat, reading the careful script. Then she set to work on the shirt, each stitch precise as prayer. When she finished, she did something she'd never done before. She added something of her own, a small reinforcement at the shoulder seam where the shirt always tore, invisible unless you knew to look for it. Sunday came gray and cold, winter making one last grasp at spring. She dressed careful for church, choosing brown wool that made her invisible as dirt. But she walked with her spine straight, met every eye that tried to shame her smaller. The service passed in a blur of hymns and sermon. She sat in the back, alone, but not lonely. When it ended, she filed out with the others, ready to return to her workshop and the week's orders. Miss Bell. Colt stood by the church steps, hat in hand. Behind him, his ranch hands waited by their wagon. Wondering if you might have time this afternoon. Got a proposition. Business, he added quickly, seeing her hesitation. She glanced around. Half the congregation was watching. Some openly, some pretending not to. Harlan Gates stood with the church elders, his face dark as old blood. What kind of business? Ranch house needs curtains. Window's been bare since the fire. Men don't complain, but... He shrugged. Seems time to make it proper. Would need you to come measure, if you're willing. A trip to the North Ranch, alone, with 5 men. The impropriety of it would feed gossip for weeks. But curtains were good money, and she was tired of performing fear. This afternoon would be fine. The surprise in his eyes was worth the gasps from nearby ladies. I'll send a wagon at 2. The wagon arrived precisely at 2. Driven by a young hand who introduced himself as Tom. Boss said to tell you Mom Murphy's coming too, he said, grinning. For propriety. Ethel Murphy was already in the wagon bed, cushioned by blankets and righteousness. About time someone civilized that ranch, she announced. 5 men living like bears in a cave. Shameful. The ride north took an hour through countryside, wearing spring like a promise. The land opened up. Mountains rising distant and snow-capped, sky so wide it made her chest ache. Tom chatted easy about horses and weather while Ethel provided running commentary on every family they passed. The ranch, when it appeared, surprised her. She'd expected something rough, barely functional. Instead, she found solid buildings, well-maintained fences, an operation that spoke of care and competence. The main house was simple but built to last. 2 stories of good timber with a wraparound porch that begged for summer evenings. See what I mean? Ethel said as they pulled up. Good bones, no soul, needs a woman's touch. The men were waiting on the porch, cleaned up and nervous as schoolboys. Colt introduced each one Tom she'd met. Then Samuel the cook, Ben and Robert the twins who finished each other's sentences, and old Pete, who looked 70 but moved like 40. "Ma'am," they chorused, hats off, feet shuffling. "Gentlemen." She kept her voice warm. These were the clothes she mended, the lives she helped hold together with thread and attention. "Shall we see about these windows?" The house tour was revealing. Clean, organized, but bare as bones. The fire had taken everything: soft curtains, rugs, the touches that made a house a home. The men had rebuilt function but not comfort. 12 windows, she counted, measuring with the tape from her basket. Plus the kitchen, heavy fabric for winter, something lighter for summer. "Whatever you think best," Colt said. He'd stayed close, but not too close, maintaining that careful distance she was beginning to recognize as his way of showing respect. "The men voted, said you'd know what's right." She looked at him then, this man who ran horses and men with equal skill but deferred to her expertise in fabric. "I'll need 2 weeks, maybe 3. "No rush. We've made do this long." Ethel had wandered into the kitchen, was harassing Samuel about his biscuit technique. The other men had scattered to chores, leaving Samantha and Colt in the main room with its bare windows and afternoon light. "The shirt," she said quietly. "I reinforced the shoulder." I noticed. His smile was small but real. "Appreciate that. And your other work. Mr. Gates might make things difficult." "Gates makes a lot of noise. Not the same as making trouble." He moved to the window, looking out at his land. "Man thinks money means he owns the town. Maybe he owns parts of it, but not all." She joined him at the window. The view stretched forever, grassland and mountain, cloud shadow and possibility. "In other places, men like him drove me out. This isn't other places." He turned to her, and his eyes held something fierce. "You've got work here, customers, a place you've made yours. That matters." "Does it?" Ask Ethel Murphy. Ask Adelaide Harrington, parading around in dresses that finally fit right. Ask my men, who don't have to look like scarecrows anymore. He paused. "Ask me." The words hung between them, weighty as winter wool. Before she could respond, Ethel bustled back in. "Samuel's biscuits are adequate," she announced. "Barely. I've given him my recipe. Now, about these curtains, I'm thinking blue for the main room. Brings out the mountains." The rest of the visit passed in measurements and discussion. But Samantha felt the shift, subtle as good seeming. She wasn't just the too-tall seamstress anymore. She was the woman who'd make the ranch house proper, who'd stood up to Harlan Gates, who belonged to this place as much as it was beginning to belong to her. The ride back was quiet, Ethel having talked herself out on the journey there. As they reached town, Sunday evening settling over dust pine like a benediction, the older woman patted Samantha's hand. "That's a good man," she said simply. "Knows the value of things, not just the price." Samantha helped her from the wagon, walked back to her workshop as stars began to pierce the darkening sky. Inside, she lit her lamp and pulled out paper, began sketching curtain designs. Simple, sturdy, but with touches of beauty, like the lace at a throat, like reinforcement where it was needed most. That night, she worked late, planning fabric and measuring memory. The church social had opened a door. Harlan Gates had tried to close it, but here she sat, stitching possibility from cotton and courage, no longer running but taking root. Outside, wind rattled the windows she'd learned to love. Inside, Samantha Bell drew curtains that would frame a future, one careful stitch at a time. Spring arrived in earnest by late April, melting the last stubborn snow and turning dust pine streets to mud soup. Samantha had finished half the curtains for the North Ranch, working by lamplight after completing her other orders. The rhythm of her days had settled into something almost like contentment. Morning tea, customers, afternoon sewing, evenings quiet stitching. It was a Tuesday when everything shifted. She was pressing a finished curtain panel when Jimmy burst through her door without knocking, face flushed with running. "Miss Bell, you gotta come quick. There's trouble at Murphy's." She set down the iron carefully. "What kind of trouble?" "Mr. Gates is there with some paper. Says he owns your building. Says you gotta get out by week's end." The words hit like cold water. She'd known Gates wouldn't let their confrontation pass, but this, how can he own it? It belonged to my great-aunt. "That's what Mrs. Murphy's trying to figure, but Mr. Murphy, he's looking mighty worried." Samantha grabbed her shawl and followed Jimmy through the muddy streets. A crowd had gathered outside the general store, the kind that formed when drama promised to be more interesting than work. She pushed through, head high, refusing to show the fear clawing at her chest. Inside, Harlan Gates stood at the counter like a man holding a winning hand at cards. Legal papers spread before him, Murphy studying them with a frown deep as wagon ruts. Ethel Murphy stood to one side, arms crossed, fury radiating from every inch of her small frame. "Ah, Miss Bell." Gates's smile was sharp as winter ice. "Good of you to join us. I was just explaining to Murphy here about your situation." "My situation?" She kept her voice level, though her hands wanted to shake. "Your great-aunt, Millicent Holbrook, borrowed against that property in 1884. $500 from my late father. The loan was never repaid." He tapped the papers. "Making me the legal owner of that shed you've been squatting in." Murphy looked up from the documents. "Papers look real enough. Samantha, filed at the county seat and everything. But the lawyer said the property was free and clear." The words came out smaller than she intended. "Lawyers miss things." Gates's voice held false sympathy. "Of course, I'm not heartless. I'd be willing to forget the debt if you'd reconsider my offer. Good position at the Double G, proper accommodations." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Become his dependent or lose everything. She'd seen this dance before. Different music, but the same steps. "I need to see those papers." Murphy slid them across. She read careful, though legal language swam before her eyes. The signature at the bottom looked like her great-aunt's shaky hand. The amount was enormous for 1884, more than a storage shed was worth. Unless... "This loan was for the tannery," she said slowly, "not the storage building. Same property." Gates's confidence never wavered. "The shed's on tannery land." "But the tannery burned in the fire of '83. She looked at Murphy. "You told me that yourself, before this loan was made." Murphy's eyes sharpened. "That's right. Old Holbrook died in that fire. Left everything to his wife." "Who was my great-aunt?" The pieces clicked together. "So the loan was made against property that had already burned. Was your father in the habit of loaning money against ashen memory? Mr. Gates?" The crowd murmured. Gates's face darkened. "The land still had value." "Not $500 worth. Not for burned ground in '84. She turned to the assembled crowd, voice gaining strength. "Seems strange, doesn't it, a loan that large for worthless land?" "You can't prove anything improper." But Gates's certainty was cracking. "Maybe not, but folks here know your father's reputation, know how he collected debts." She met eyes in the crowd, saw recognition dawning. My great-aunt was a widow, alone, with property men wanted. How convenient that she'd sign it away. Ethel Murphy stepped forward. "I remember Millicent Holbrook, sharp as a tack until the day she died. Never would have signed bad paper." "Memories aren't legal documents," Gates snarled. "No," said a new voice from the doorway. "But these are—" Colt Riggs stood there, dusty from hard riding, holding a leather portfolio. Behind him, the minister and two of the church elders crowded close. "Found these in the church records," Colt continued, moving into the store. "Reverend Adams here helped me look. Seems Miss Millicent Holbrook donated that storage building to the church in 1885, separate from the tannery. Church has been renting it out ever since." sending the money to her, then to her estate. He set the portfolio on the counter. All legal, all proper. The church owns that building. Mr. Gates has for 3 years before your claim. Samantha stared at the documents, at Colt's steady presence, at Gates's face cycling through colors like sunset. The church owns my shop. Technically, Reverend Adams said, stepping forward. Though we're happy to continue the current arrangement, nominal rent to a worthy tenant improving the property. This isn't over, Gates hissed, but he was already backing toward the door. Papers crumpled in his fist. Yes, Ethel Murphy said firmly. It is, and if you bother Miss Bell again, the Ladies' Aid Society will have words. We've been looking for a new cause. Protecting women from harassment might suit us fine. After Gates left, the crowd dispersed slowly. Reluctant to leave such prime drama, Samantha found herself standing at the counter, legs unsteady as a new colt's. You all right? Colt's voice was quiet, meant just for her. You rode to the county seat to look for records. Seemed worth checking. Man like Gates, there's usually something. He paused. Jimmy might have mentioned the trouble when he delivered mending yesterday. She looked at him then. Really looked. Trail dust in his hair, exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. He'd ridden hard, spent hours in dusty records. For her. Thank you. The words seemed insufficient, but they were all she had. You'd have figured it out yourself. Just saved some time. He touched his hat brim. Best get back. Horses don't much care about human drama. He was at the door when she found her voice. Colt! He turned. The curtains will be ready by Sunday. Perhaps you could come for supper after, to discuss hanging them. Something shifted in his face. Careful distance giving way to warmth. I'd like that. After he left, Ethel Murphy squeezed Samantha's hand. That's 2 good men now, the Reverend and Colt, who stood up for you today. This town's deciding who you are to us. I'd say the vote's going your way. Walking back to her shop, safe and solid in hers. Samantha felt the truth of it. Dust Pine wasn't just another stop anymore. It was becoming something else, something that looked like home. She spent the evening finishing the last curtain panel, each stitch a small celebration. As she worked, she let herself imagine Sunday. Colt at her table, sharing a meal, talking about windows and weather and things that mattered. No careful distances, no performance. Just 2 people who'd learned to take up space in the world, choosing to share it. Saturday brought unexpected warmth, the kind of spring day that made winter feel like a bad dream. Samantha opened her door to air out the shop and found a package on her step. Inside a jar of preserves, bread wrapped in clean cloth, and a note in Colt's careful hand. For tomorrow, Samuel insisted on contributing. He's nervous about you judging our housekeeping. See, she smiled, set the preserves on her shelf where sunlight could catch the glass. One more piece of home, building slowly. That afternoon, Adelaide Harrington arrived for a fitting. As Samantha pinned her hem, the banker's wife cleared her throat. I owe you an apology, she said, for what I said about the dancing. Samantha's hand stilled. Mrs. Harrington. Gates has been spreading poison about every independent woman in this town for years. We let him because... She sighed. Because it was easier than fighting. But you fought. That matters. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the biggest fight of all. Adelaide met her eyes in the mirror. You're good for this town. Miss Bell, good for all of us who've been made to feel small. After she left, Samantha stood in her shop, surrounded by fabric and thread and the life she'd built. Tomorrow, Colt would come for supper. Monday, she'd hang curtains at the North Ranch. Tuesday would bring new work, new challenges. But today, she was exactly where she belonged. A too-tall woman in a small Wyoming town, no longer running but taking root. The storage shed had become a workshop. The workshop had become a business, and somewhere between first snow and spring thaw, Dustpine had become home. She picked up her needle, began working on a new dress. This one would be rose-colored. She decided, something hopeful, something that caught light and held it, something that didn't apologize for being beautiful. Outside her window, the mountains stood eternal against the sky. Inside, Samantha Bell stitched her future one careful thread at a time, no longer afraid of taking up exactly as much space as she was meant to fill. The whispers started small, like drops before a storm. Samantha noticed them first at Murphy's store conversations that stopped when she entered, eyes that slid away like oil on water. "Don't pay them mind," Ethel Murphy said, measuring out thread with more force than necessary. Small minds need something to chew on. But by Wednesday, the whispers had grown teeth. 3 customers canceled orders. The minister's wife suggested, delicately, that perhaps the curtain installation at the North Ranch should wait until talk dies down. "What talk?" Samantha kept her voice steady, though her hands wanted to clench. "Mrs. Adams fidgeted with her gloves. About Sunday evening, you were seen, alone with Mr. Riggs, after dark." The supper. Of course, she'd been so careful for so long. And one evening of normalcy, of setting aside armor and just being, had given the gossips ammunition. "We discussed the curtain installation over a meal. The door remained open. I'm sure, but Mr. Gates has been vocal about the impropriety, about what kind of woman entertains men alone." The minister's wife looked genuinely distressed. "My husband doesn't believe a word, but others..." "Others, always others. Anonymous judges weighing her worth and finding her wanting." That afternoon, 2 more cancellations arrived. By evening, her order book had thinned like ice in spring. She sat at her table, lamp turned low, and calculated. Without steady work, she had perhaps 3 weeks before the arithmetic turned cruel. A knock interrupted her figures. She found Tom from the North Ranch at her door, hat in hand. "Miss Bell, boss sent me to say the curtain installation's still on for Saturday. If you're willing. Said to tell you..." The young man shifted, embarrassed. "Said to tell you the only opinion that matters at the North Ranch is ours, and we voted unanimous. Small kindness, vast as sky. Tell Mr. Riggs I'll be there." Tom grinned. "Also, Samuel sent these." He produced a cloth bundle. "Said you'd know what to do with them. Inside eggs, fresh that morning. And a note. For someone who makes things beautiful, don't let ugly words win." She spent Thursday working on the few remaining orders, making each stitch perfect as prayer. Friday brought no new customers but did bring Ethel Murphy, armed with determination and a fruit pie. "Eat," she commanded, settling at Samantha's table like a general planning campaign. "Can't fight on an empty stomach." "I'm not fighting anyone." "Aren't you Gates has been working hard, spreading his poison. Says you're exactly what he warned against, a woman with no morals, corrupting good men." Samantha's laugh was bitter as winter coffee. "1 supper, 1 dance, in 7 towns. That's all it took." "This isn't those 7 towns." Ethel leaned forward. "This is Dustpine. We're made of sterner stuff, but you need to be visible. Come to church Sunday. Hold your head high. Make them look you in the eye while they judge. And if they've already decided, then make them live with their decision. Make them see what they're losing." Saturday dawned clear and cold, spring retreating like it had remembered unfinished business. Samantha loaded the curtains carefully into the borrowed wagon, each panel wrapped in clean muslin. If this was to be her last major commission in Dustpine, she'd make it count. The North Ranch was Saturday busy when she arrived, horses in the corral, men working with the focused energy of those who love their labor. Colt emerged from the barn, sleeves rolled up, a healing cut across his knuckles. "Miss Bell," formal, in front of his men, but his eyes held warmth. "Ready when you are." They worked in companionable efficiency. She directed, the men hung, adjusted, rehung at her word. The curtains transformed the house. Suddenly it had privacy, softness, the suggestion of home rather than mere shelter. "It's like a different place," Ben said, one of the twins, staring at the main room. "Like a real house now." "It was always real," Samantha said, adjusting a fold. "Just needed its finishing touches." "Like people," old Pete observed. "Some of us come half-finished, need the right hands to complete the work." By afternoon, every window wore its new dignity. The men gathered in the main room, awkward with appreciation. We took up a collection," Samuel said, producing a leather pouch. "For the work." She'd quoted a price, but the pouch was heavier. "This is too much." "No such thing. For work this good." Colt's voice was quiet. "Besides, the men insisted on adding a bonus for making us look civilized." "You were always civilized. You just needed curtains to prove it to yourselves." That got smiles, even from stone-faced Robert. As she prepared to leave, Colt walked her to the wagon. "Heard you've had cancellations," he said, low enough the others couldn't hear. "Word travels." "Gates travels faster." He helped her onto the wagon seat. "This isn't right." "Right hasn't got much to do with it." She gathered the reins. "Never has." "Maybe not before, but now." He looked back at his house, his men, his land. "Now you're part of Dustpine. That means something." She wanted to believe him, but she'd believed before, in other towns, other possibilities. "We'll see." "Sunday, church, be there." "Ethel already commanded me." "Good, but I'm asking." He stepped back. "Wear something bold." She looked down at him. This man who'd brought wood and warmth and never asked for payment. "Why?" "Because they expect you to hide. Don't give them the satisfaction." She drove back to town with his words echoing like hoofbeats. Saturday evening passed in preparation, pressing her best dress, the navy with the lace, polishing her boots, arranging her hair in elaborate braids that added inches. If she was going to face judgment, she'd face it at full height. Sunday morning came pale and sharp. She entered the church precisely as the bell finished ringing. Time to avoid the gathering gossips but ensure maximum visibility. The navy dress moved like water, the lace at her throat catching light. She'd added her grandmother's cameo, the only jewelry she owned, letting it rest against the lace like a declaration. Conversations died as she walked down the aisle. She took her usual seat in the back, spine straight, eyes forward. Let them look. Let them measure and weigh and find whatever they'd already decided to find. The service began. Reverend Adams spoke about compassion, about the danger of casting stones. His eyes found hers once, briefly, and she saw apology there. But apologies didn't pay bills or restore reputations. Then, movement in the front pews. Adelaide Harrington stood, turned, and walked down the aisle. For one terrible moment, Samantha thought she was leaving because of her presence, but Adelaide stopped at her pew. "May I?" she asked, indicating the empty space. Samantha nodded, too surprised to speak. Adelaide settled beside her, arranging her skirts with precision. A minute later, Ethel Murphy appeared on her other side, huffing slightly from the walk. "Scoot over, girl. These old bones need room." Then came the minister's wife, pale but determined. The widow Pearson, young Mrs. Davidson with her new baby. One by one, the women of Dustpine left their traditional seats and arranged themselves around Samantha like a living wall. The men watched, bewildered. Harlan Gates, in his prominent front pew, turned red as fresh beef, but he couldn't say anything, not during service, not without making a scene that would reflect on him. When the service ended, the women rose as one. They filed out together, Samantha in their center, protected and claimed. At the church door, Adelaide turned to face the emerging congregation. "The Ladies' Aid Society will be meeting at Miss Bell's establishment on Tuesday," she announced, voice carrying clear. "We'll be discussing the spring bazaar and reviewing Miss Bell's excellent needlework. All ladies welcome. Good day." They swept out together, leaving silence behind like a wake. Only when they reached the street did Samantha find her voice. "Why?" she managed. "Because," Ethel said firmly. "We've all been the tall tailor at some point. Too loud, too quiet, too much, not enough. Gates just gave us reason to remember." "And," Adelaide added with a smile sharp as shears, "because that man needs to learn he doesn't own this town's opinions." They dispersed slowly, each woman touching Samantha's arm or pressing her hand before leaving. She stood on the street, navy dress bright in the morning sun, and felt something she'd never experienced in 7 towns and as many failures. Belonging. Colt appeared at her elbow, hat in hand. That was something to see. "I didn't ask them to." "No, that's what made it powerful. They chose." He looked at her, really looked, and she saw pride there. "Told you Dustpine was different. It's not over. Gates won't stop. Neither will they." He gestured toward the departing women. "Neither will I." The words settled between them, weighted with promise. She thought of curtains hung with care, of women standing when it mattered, of a town that might, just might, have room for a too tall seamstress with opinions. "Walk me home," she asked. "Honored." They walked through Dustpine's quiet streets, her hand on his arm, visible and unashamed. Let the gossips chew on that. She had work to do. A ladies' aid meeting to host, a life to build in this place that was teaching her, finally, what home could mean. Behind them, the church bells rang the hour. Ahead, her shop waited, ready for whatever battles Monday might bring. But for now, for this moment, Samantha Bell walked tall through the town that had chosen her and let herself believe in the possibility of staying. The fire started just past midnight on a Tuesday in early May. Samantha woke to shouting, to the acrid bite of smoke, to Jimmy pounding on her door. "Fire at the North Ranch. They need everyone." She threw her shawl over her nightdress, shoved feet into boots, and joined the stream of townspeople rushing north. The sky glowed orange, smoke billowing black against stars. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The ranch, the men, Colt. By the time they reached the ranch, the barn was fully engulfed. Flames licked at the sky, sparks showering like deadly snow. Men formed bucket brigades, but it was like throwing teacups at an inferno. "The horses!" someone screamed. She saw him then, Colt, silhouetted against flames, leading a terrified mare from the barn. His shirt was scorched, face black with soot. He handed the horse off and plunged back inside. "There's 3 more in there," old Pete shouted, "and Colt won't leave 'em." The roof beam cracked, sagged. Any moment it would collapse. Without thinking, Samantha grabbed a bucket, doused herself with water, and ran for the barn entrance. "Samantha, no!" Ethel Murphy's voice behind her, but she was already inside. The heat hit like a physical wall, smoke thick as wool, choking, blinding. She dropped to her knees where the air was clearer, crawled forward. "Colt!" her voice lost in the roar of flames. She found him by the stalls, trying to calm a panicked stallion. Blood ran from a gash on his shoulder where something had struck him. "Get out!" he shouted when he saw her. "Not without you." She grabbed the rope from his hands. "Together." They worked as one, her speaking low and steady to the horse while Colt guided. The stallion finally followed, whites of his eyes showing. Behind them, another beam crashed down, sparks exploding. They burst from the barn just as the roof collapsed inward. The crowd surged forward, pulling them clear, someone wrapping blankets around them. Samantha's lungs burned, eyes streamed. But she was alive. Colt was alive.
The other horses,
she gasped. Tom and Robert got him. Old Pete was there, face grim with relief. You damn fools. Could have been killed. Colt's hand found hers, squeezed hard. You came in after me. You'd have done the same. He looked at her, soot-covered, singed, magnificent in her courage, and something shifted in his face. Yes, I would have. The barn was gone by dawn, reduced to smoking timbers and ash. But the house stood safe, the horses saved, no lives lost. As the sun rose, revealing the devastation, the town rallied. Murphy organized supplies. The church women brought food, even Adelaide Harrington, in a practical dress, helped serve coffee to exhausted firefighters. Lightning, someone asked. Tom shook his head. Found lamp oil, rags. This was set. Silence fell like a hammer. Samantha felt Colt go rigid beside her. Gates. The name came out flat. Dangerous. Can't prove it, the sheriff said, but his eyes said he believed it. Man's got alibis for days. Doesn't matter. Colt turned to his men. We rebuild, bigger, better. And this time, we post watches. The town lingered as morning strengthened, reluctant to leave the ranch vulnerable. It was Samantha who organized them. We need shifts, she announced, voice carrying. Rebuilding crews, food preparation. The men can't do this alone. Who put you in charge? Someone muttered. I did. Adelaide Harrington stepped forward. Unless someone else wants to coordinate, no, then listen to Miss Bell. By noon, Dustpine had become a machine of purposeful action. Samantha found herself at the center, organizing with the same precision she used for stitching. Colt watched her work. This woman who'd run into fire for him now running recovery efforts like a general. Your shoulder needs tending, she said during a brief lull. It's nothing. It's bleeding through your shirt. Come on. She led him to the house, to the kitchen she'd helped make homely with curtains now gray with smoke, made him sit while she cleaned the wound, stitched it closed with the same careful hands that made beauty from cloth. You could have died, she said quietly, tying off the thread. So could you. I couldn't just watch, couldn't stand outside while you... Her voice broke. He caught her hands, stilled their trembling. I know. They stayed frozen, her standing between his knees, his hands holding hers. The kitchen door was open. Anyone could see. She didn't care. Samantha. Her name was rough in his throat. I need to say something. Colt, Miss Bell, Robert burst in. Sheriff's here. Says he found something. The moment shattered. They returned to the yard where the sheriff held a partially burned leather glove. Fancy work, he said, monogrammed H.G. Harlan Gates, careless in his arson as he was in his assumptions. Still can't arrest him on a glove, the sheriff said, but his tone suggested he wanted to. Need more. Then we get more. Ethel Murphy declared, that man's terrorized this town long enough. The rebuilding began that afternoon. Wagons of lumber arrived, donated or sold at cost. Men who'd worked dawn to dusk on their own land stayed to frame walls. Women who'd whispered about Samantha a week ago now worked beside her, serving meals to work crews. She was ladling stew when Gates himself arrived, mounted on his expensive horse, surveying damage with satisfaction poorly hidden. Shame about the fire, he said, loud enough to carry. Dangerous business, ranching, maybe it's a sign. Time to sell, move somewhere, safer. Only danger around here, Colt said evenly, is men who mistake wealth for worth. Gates's face darkened. Careful. Riggs, you've lost one barn. Wouldn't want to lose more. That a threat? An observation. His eyes found Samantha. Your woman there showed real courage last night. Shame if something happened because you wouldn't see sense. The worksite went silent. Every man straightened, hands tightening on tools. The women stepped closer together, flanking Samantha like an army. "Say that again." Colt's voice was winter ice. "Call her my woman again. Threaten her again. Please." Gates read the violence in his eyes, the ready tension in every worker. He was rich, powerful, but he was also outnumbered 30-1 by people who'd seen enough. "No threat intended," he said, reining his horse around. "Just neighborly concern." After he left, work resumed with grim determination. But Samantha saw the looks, felt the shift. The town had chosen sides, and it wasn't Gates's. That night, she stayed late helping organize the next day's cruise. The ranch house kitchen had become command central, maps and lists covering the table. She was alone, tallying lumber needs, when Colt found her. "You should go home, rest." "So should you." He sat across from her, exhaustion carved in every line.
Can't keep thinking about the horses. If you hadn't come in.
"But I did." "Why?" Such a simple question, such a complicated answer. "Because," she said slowly, "somewhere between that first night with firewood and now, you became someone I couldn't lose." The words hung in smoke-scented air. He stood, came around the table, drew her to her feet. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Samantha Bell," he said, "you know what you're risking being with me. Gates won't stop."
I've been driven from 7 towns for being too tall, too bold, too much myself.
She covered his hand with hers. "If I'm finally going to make a stand, I'd rather make it for something that matters." He kissed her then, soft despite the urgency humming between them. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. "Here, tonight. The house is full of people. It's proper enough. Just stay." She understood. After fire and threats and near loss, he needed her close, needed to know she was safe. "Yes." They returned to the kitchen table, to plans and lists. But now their knees touched beneath it. Now his hand found hers between tallies. The barn was gone, reduced to memory and ash. But from its ruins, something else was building. Something Gates had tried to burn but only made stronger. Outside, men kept watch. Inside, Samantha Bell and Colt Riggs planned reconstruction by lamplight, no longer pretending they were anything but what they'd become. 2 people who'd found home in each other, worth fighting for, worth building for, worth standing tall against whatever storms might come. The fire had been meant to destroy. Instead, it had forged them into something unbreakable. Gates would learn, as others had, that some things only grew stronger in the flames. The town council meeting was scheduled for the last Friday in May. Word had spread that Gates planned to propose new ordinances, regulations about property ownership, business licenses, things that would tighten his grip on Dustpine's throat. But the fire had changed something fundamental in the town's backbone. Samantha arrived early, wearing her best dress, the rose-colored one she'd made with hope stitched into every seam. The council room was already half full. Ethel Murphy commanded the front row like a general surveying battlefield. Adelaide Harrington sat beside her, ledgers in hand. The ranch hands occupied one wall, cleaned up but still smelling faintly of sawdust from the ongoing barn construction. "Quite a crowd," Reverend Adams observed, taking his seat. "People are done being silent," Ethel replied. "About time, too." Gates entered precisely at 7, followed by 2 men Samantha didn't recognize, lawyers from Cheyenne. By their look, his confidence had returned, wrapped around him like expensive cloth. He took his customary seat at the council table, eyes scanning the crowd, pausing on Samantha with a smile sharp as glass. Mayor Hendricks, a thin man who'd spent years bending whichever way Gates's wind blew, called the meeting to order. "We have several proposals tonight regarding business conduct and property management." "Mr. Mayor." Adelaide Harrington stood, voice clear as mountain water.
Before we discuss new business, we have old business to address.
We do.
The matter of the recent arson at the North Ranch.
Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gates's lawyers shifted.
That's a matter for the sheriff,
the mayor stuttered. Is it? Adelaide opened her ledger. Because I have here records of suspicious fires over the past 5 years. The Henley farm, after they refused to sell. The widow Martinez's store, when she wouldn't accept Gates's offer. The schoolhouse, when the teacher spoke against circumstantial gossip. One of Gates's lawyers interrupted. Perhaps. Adelaide's smile was razor thin. But patterns tell stories, especially when combined with evidence. Sheriff Morrison stood.
Found more than a glove at the ranch fire. Found boot prints, distinctive ones, custom-made boots from Denver.
He looked directly at Gates. Only one man in town wears that particular style. Boot prints prove nothing. Gates snapped, but sweat beaded on his forehead. No, Colt said, standing slowly. But testimony might. The side door opened. A small man entered, hat clutched in nervous hands. Samantha recognized him, one of Gates's own ranch hands. This is Walter Briggs, the sheriff announced.
He has something to say.
Walter's voice shook, but carried. Mr. Gates paid me to set the fire. Paid Jenkins, too, but he lit out for California yesterday. I can't do it anymore. Can't watch good people burn for his greed. The room exploded. Gates surged to his feet, face purple.
You lying little.
Sit down. The sheriff's hand rested on his pistol. Mr. Briggs has agreed to testify, in exchange for consideration. This is conspiracy, Gates's lawyer shouted. We demand. You demand nothing. The voice came from the back of the room. Everyone turned as Judge Thurman entered. The circuit judge. Not due in Dustpine for another month. Gentlemen, ladies. He moved to the front with measured steps. Sheriff Morrison sent word about the situation here. Given the serious nature of the allegations, I felt it necessary to arrive early. Gates went pale. His lawyers whispered furiously. Furthermore, the judge continued, I've been reviewing property records for the county. Interesting discoveries. Several loans that seem questionable. Properties acquired under duress. A pattern of behavior that suggests someone has forgotten that wealth doesn't place one above the law. Your Honor, Gates started. You'll have your day in court. Mr. Gates, Monday morning. Until then. He nodded to the sheriff. I believe you have work to do. The arrest was swift. Gates blustered. Threatened. Promised retribution. But the sheriff had brought deputies, and the crowd that might once have cowered now stood witness. As they let him out, his eyes found Samantha.
This is your doing,
he snarled.
You and your...
Careful, Colt warned, stepping between them. You're in enough trouble without adding to it. After Gates was gone, the meeting continued in a daze. The proposed ordinances were dismissed. New council members were suggested, including, to Samantha's shock, herself. We need someone who understands what it's like to build something from nothing, Adelaide said. Someone who won't bend to the next Gates who comes along.
I'm not even from here,
Samantha protested. Neither was half this town when they arrived, Ethel countered.
You're from here now. That's what matters.
The vote was unanimous. Later, as the crowd dispersed into the night, Samantha found herself on the church steps, trying to understand how she'd gone from unwanted seamstress to town council member in mere months. Overwhelmed, Colt asked, appearing beside her. Completely. Good. Means you understand the responsibility. He took her hand, laced their fingers together. Proud of you. I just stood up.
That's everything. Sometimes.
They walked slowly, in no hurry to part. The night was warm, spring finally triumphant over winter's memory. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. unchanged by human drama below.
What happens now? She asked.
With Gates gone to trial, town moves forward, ranch finishes rebuilding. Life goes on, but different, better. They'd reached her shop. She turned to face him, their joined hands between them. And us. He studied her in the lamplight from her window.
What do you want to happen with us? Such a simple question, such a terrifying answer.
But she'd run from 7 towns rather than shrink herself. She wouldn't shrink from this. I want Sunday dinners and shared silences. I want to mend your shirts and know you'll be wearing them. I want to stop pretending that careful distance is the same as being safe. She took a breath.
I want to build something worth staying for.
His free hand rose to cup her cheek. Samantha Bell, I've been half in love with you since you opened that door in December. Proud and frozen and refusing to break. Full in love since you ran into a burning barn after me. What I want is whatever years we get, building whatever we can build, facing whatever comes, together.
That sounds like a proposal.
It's a promise. The proposal comes when I have a ring worthy of you. His thumb traced her cheekbone. But know this, you're not just staying in Dust Pine anymore. You're home, my home, if you'll have me. Instead of words, she kissed him. There on the street, where anyone could see, where gossips would feast for weeks. Let them. She'd earned this. Earned him. Earned the right to choose her happiness over their approval. When they broke apart, he was smiling.
That a yes?
To all of it, yes. He walked her to her door, kissed her once more, soft and sure. Council Member Bell has a nice sound.
Don't remind me. I have no idea what I'm doing.
You'll figure it out. You always do.
After he left, she stood in her shop, her successful shop, in her town, where her voice now held official weight. 6 months ago, she'd arrived with nothing but stubborn pride and skilled hands. Now she had a business, a purpose, a place at the table, and a man who saw her at full height and never once asked her to shrink. She lit her lamp, pulled out paper and pen. There were letters to write to the towns that had driven her out, not in anger, but in thanks. Without their rejection, she'd never have found Dust Pine, never have discovered that the secret wasn't finding a place that would accept her despite her height, her voice, her stubborn strength. The secret was finding a place that needed exactly those things. Outside, Dust Pine settled into sleep. The half-built barn at the North Ranch stood like a promise against the sky. The church bells tolled the hour, marking time in a town that had faced its tyrant and won, and in a converted storage shed that had become a thriving shop. Samantha Bell, seamstress and council member and woman no longer running, began planning a future she finally believed she could keep. The dress she'd design next would be white, she decided. Something beautiful but practical, elegant but strong. Something a tall woman could wear while promising to stand beside a horseman who'd taught her that some things were worth defending, and some places were worth calling home. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight, she had a town to help rebuild and a life to keep stitching. One careful, permanent seam at a time. June arrived with heat and dust, and Gates's trial that shook Dust Pine to its foundations. The conviction came swift arson, intimidation, fraud stretching back years. As they led him away to territorial prison, the town exhaled collectively, free of a weight they'd carried so long they'd forgotten its burden. But freedom, Samantha learned, came with its own challenges. "We need new businesses," Mayor Hendricks said at the council meeting, nervously adjusting to actually leading rather than following Gates's commands. "With the Double G Ranch being sold off in parcels, we need to attract settlers." "What we need," Samantha said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice, "is to decide who we want to be, not just who we're not." The other council members, mostly new, mostly those who'd stood against Gates, nodded thoughtfully. "What do you propose?" Adelaide asked. "We have good land, good water, the railway connection. But what we really have is craft. Look around. Murphy's store stocks quality goods. The smithy does work that lasts. The North Ranch breeds horses folks travel 3 states to buy. She paused. We're not a boom town. We're a building town. We should embrace that. Over the following weeks, her vision took shape. The town organized a craft fair for late July, inviting artisans from surrounding territories. Samantha found herself at the center of planning, her organizational skills honed by years of precise stitching now applied to municipal purpose. It was during one of these planning sessions that Colt found her in the council office, surrounded by papers and lists. "You missed supper," he said, setting down a covered plate. "Sorry, lost track of time. We have 17 vendors confirmed, but the space allocation—" She stopped, seeing his fond exasperation. "I missed supper." "You did." He pulled up a chair. "Eat. The town won't collapse if you take 10 minutes. She ate while he watched, comfortable in shared silence. They'd found an easy rhythm over the weeks. Sunday dinners at the ranch, Wednesday evenings at her shop, stolen moments between their respective work. The whole town knew they were courting, but propriety was maintained. Mostly. "I have something for you," he said when she finished. From his pocket, he drew a small wooden box. Inside, cushioned in blue velvet, lay a silver thimble. Not just any thimble. This one was engraved with delicate vines, and around the band, in script so fine she had to lean close to read, "You fit nowhere else, but perfectly here." "Colt," her voice caught. "I know I said I'd wait until I had a ring, but the smith had silver, and the engraver was passing through, and—" He took her hand. "I wanted you to have something, to know that while you're building the town, I'm building too, for us." She slipped the thimble onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as things seemed to when he was involved. "It's beautiful." "It's a promise. The ring's coming. The ranch is finally profitable again. The house is proper thanks to your curtains. I'm not a rich man, but I'm a certain one. Certain about you, about us." She kissed him then, there in the council office where anyone could walk in. Let them. She was tired of measuring happiness in careful distances. A cough from the doorway made them spring apart. Old Pete stood there, grinning wide. "Sorry to interrupt, but Miss Samantha, you need to see this." They followed him outside where a wagon waited. In the back, carefully packed, were bolts of fabric. Fine wool, cotton, even silk. More than she'd ever seen outside a Denver warehouse. "What is this?" "Fellow came through from San Francisco," Pete explained. "Heard about our craft fair, said he'd been looking for a place to establish a Western outlet for his fabric import business. Wanted to know if we had a seamstress worthy of such goods." "What did you tell him?" "Truth, that we had the best seamstress in 3 territories. He left these as samples. Said if your work with them is as good as advertised, he'll make Dust Pine a regular stop." Samantha touched the fabrics with reverent fingers. Opportunities like this didn't come to small towns, not unless those towns were becoming something more. "I'll need help," she said. "If this works, I'll need to train assistants." "Sarah Jenkins is clever with a needle," Colt suggested. "And the widow Martinez's daughters." "An expansion," Samantha breathed. "A real shop, maybe even a school for seamstresses." "Now you're thinking like a builder," Colt said, pride warm in his voice. The next weeks blurred together. Samantha worked dawn to dusk, preparing pieces for the craft fair, training her new assistants, managing council business. The town hummed with purpose. The banker Harrington, freed from Gates's influence, offered fair loans for business expansion. New families arrived, drawn by stories of a town that had faced down a tyrant and chosen community over fear. 3 nights before the fair, Samantha was working late when unusual sounds drew her attention. Horses moving fast, shouts, her blood chilled, memories of the fire still fresh. She grabbed the rifle Colt had insisted she keep and stepped onto her porch. But these weren't raiders. It was the ranch hands, whooping and hollering, Colt at their head. "What's happened?" she called. Colt swung down from his horse, grinning broader than she'd ever seen. "Army contract came through. 50 horses a year for the next 5 years. We did it. Samantha, the ranch is secure." She set down the rifle, ran to him. He caught her, swung her around, her feet leaving the ground. When he set her down, he kept his arms around her. "This calls for celebration," Old Pete announced. "Music and dancing and a question." Colt interrupted. He dropped to one knee, right there in the dusty street. From his vest pocket, he drew a ring-simple gold set with a small sapphire that caught the lamplight like captured sky. "Samantha Bell, you've already said yes to building a life with me, but I'm asking formal now, in front of these witnesses and under these stars. Will you marry me?" Her heart was too full for immediate words. This man who'd brought her firewood and never asked for thanks, who'd seen her height as strength, her opinions as worthwhile, her presence as gift rather than burden. "Yes," she managed. "Yes to all of it. Yes to you." He slipped the ring on her finger, stood and kissed her while the ranch hands cheered and lights appeared in windows as the commotion woke the town. "When?" someone called. Samantha looked at Colt, saw her own thoughts reflected. "After the fair," she said, "when the town's shown what it can be, when we've proved that building something together is better than standing alone." 3 weeks, Colt agreed. "Enough time for a dress." She laughed. "I've been sketching it for months." The celebration moved to Murphy's store, where Ethel appeared with bottles she'd been saving for occasions worth marking. Half the town gathered, toasting the engagement and the Army contract and the fair and the simple joy of choosing their own path. "To Samantha Bell," Adelaide raised her glass, "who came to town too tall and too bold and taught us that was exactly tall and bold enough." "To Colt Riggs," Samantha countered, "who knows that the best things are worth rebuilding, whether barns or towns or lives." As the evening wound down, she and Colt found themselves back at her shop. The fabrics from San Francisco gleamed in the lamplight. Promise made manifest. "No more running," he said softly. "No more measuring yourself against others' comfort. This is home now." "I know." She leaned into him, feeling the solid truth of it. "I knew the night you brought firewood. I just needed time to believe it. And now?" She held up her left hand, ring catching light, looked around her shop with its fine fabrics and growing success, thought of the council seat and the craft fair and the wedding to plan. "Now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, exactly who I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with." He kissed her temple. "Then let's build the rest together." Outside, dust pines settled into sleep. A town remaking itself. A couple preparing to pledge their lives. A future stitching itself together from courage and thread and the radical act of staying. In 3 weeks, she'd stand in the church where she'd once sat alone and promised to love this man who'd seen her true. But tonight, she had a fair to finish planning and a wedding dress to complete. Tonight, she had work worthy of her hands and a home worthy of her heart. Samantha Bell, seamstress and council member and bride-to-be, lit her lamp and began cutting silk, each piece shaped with purpose, each seam a promise, each stitch a small act of faith that some things, once built true, could last forever. The craft fair dawned bright and clear. July skies stretched endless blue above dust pines transformed Main Street. Booths lined both sides, displaying everything from leather goods to pottery, fine furniture to preserved foods. At the center, Samantha's expanded seamstress pavilion showcased not only her work, but that of her 3 apprentices. "Nervous?" Sarah Jenkins asked, adjusting the display of embroidered shawls. "Terrified," Samantha admitted, then smiled. "But the good kind." The morning brought curious locals, but by noon, visitors from neighboring towns began arriving. The fabric merchant from San Francisco missed her.
Chen had kept his word and spread news of Dust Pine's fair throughout his trading routes. Samantha was demonstrating a complex embroidery technique when she spotted him tall, well-dressed, moving through the crowd with purpose. For one heart-stopping moment, she thought Gates had somehow returned, but this man was younger, cleaner cut. "Miss Bell," he removed his hat. "I'm Daniel Winters, attorney from Denver. I understand you're to be married soon." Her hand moved instinctively to her ring. "In 2 weeks. Why?" "I represent the estate of Millicent Holbrook." He smiled at her surprise. "Your great-aunt had more holdings than that storage shed. Miss Bell, properties in Denver and Colorado Springs. She left instructions that they be held in trust until you found your place." Her words. Samantha's hand stilled on the embroidery. "I don't understand." "She followed your journey through the towns, waited for you to stop running." He produced a leather portfolio. "The inheritance is substantial, enough to do whatever you wish, wherever you wish." The irony wasn't lost on her. After months of scraping by, building from nothing, now she had wealth. After being driven from 7 towns, now she could go anywhere. "I need to think," she managed. "Of course, I'll be at the boarding house through tomorrow." As he left, Samantha looked around the fair at her apprentices, at the townspeople who'd become family, at Colt helping a customer load furniture into a wagon. Wealth enough to go anywhere, but she was already exactly where she wanted to be. The fair was deemed a rousing success. Orders poured in, not just for Samantha, but for all the craftspeople. Mr. Chen committed to quarterly fabric deliveries. 3 new families announced plans to settle in Dust Pine. That evening, as they cleaned up, Samantha told Colt about the lawyer's visit. He listened in silence, face unreadable. "So," he said finally, "you're wealthy?" "Apparently." "Could live anywhere. Denver, San Francisco, even back east." She stepped close, took his face in her hands. "Colt Riggs, are you really wondering if money would make me leave this?" She gestured at the town. "Their town. I was ready to marry you when I had nothing but thread and stubbornness. Wealth doesn't change that." Relief flickered in his eyes. "What will you do with it?" "Build that seamstress school we talked about. Maybe help other businesses get started. Definitely fix up that storage shed proper. It's still drafty." She smiled. "Use it to make Dust Pine what we know it can be." He kissed her, there in the middle of Main Street. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Not in the last hour." "Shameful oversight. I love you. Samantha Bell." The next 2 weeks flew by in wedding preparations. Samantha met with Winters, arranging to use some inheritance for the school, keeping the rest invested. The town threw itself into wedding planning with enthusiasm that would have embarrassed her 6 months ago. Now she accepted it as the affection it was. The dress was finished 3 days before the wedding. Ivory silk from Mr. Chen's finest stock with pearl buttons and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Simple lines that celebrated rather than disguised her height. She'd embroidered tiny horses along the hem, too subtle to see unless you knew to look. A private joke, a promise of the life they'd build. The wedding morning brought half the territory to Dust Pine. Samantha stood in her shop, soon to be expanded into the building next door, while Ethel Murphy and Adelaide Harrington helped her dress. "You could have been married anywhere," Adelaide said, fastening the buttons. "With that inheritance, you could have had a Denver society wedding." "I'm marrying where I found home," Samantha said simply, "where I'd learned to stop running." The church was packed as her music began. Samantha walked down the aisle alone, no one to give her away because she was giving herself, freely and with full knowledge of her worth. She walked tall, met every eye, smiled at these people who'd become hers. Colt waited at the altar in his one good suit, pressed and proper. But it was his eyes that held her, gray-green like sage after rain, full of pride and promise and a love that didn't ask her to be smaller. Reverend Adams spoke about building, about foundations, about two people who'd found in each other not completion, but complement. When he asked for the rings, it was old Pete who produced them, tears streaming unashamed down his weathered face. "Do you, Samantha Bell, take this man?"
"I do. Clear, certain, carrying to the back pews."
"Do you, Colton Riggs, take this woman?"
"I do. Rough with emotion, but unwavering."
"Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Colt kissed her as the church erupted in cheers. When they turned to face the congregation, Samantha saw her life spread before her. Not the life she'd imagined in those 7 towns that couldn't hold her, but something better, something real. The reception filled Murphy's store and spilled into the street. Music played, couples danced, and Samantha found herself passed from partner to partner, welcomed and celebrated. But it was the quiet moment with Colt, stolen between songs, that she'd remember most. "No regrets?" he asked, holding her close. "Only that it took 7 towns to find you." "Worth the wait," he said, "worth everything." As evening painted the sky purple and gold, they stood together watching their town celebrate. Tomorrow would bring the work of building, the school, the businesses, the life they'd create. There would be challenges. Certainly, other gates would come, other fires would threaten. But tonight, they had a town that had chosen courage, a love that had chosen truth, and a future they'd stitched together one careful day at a time. "Dance with me," Colt said, pulling her back to the floor. "Always." They moved together as the frontier stars emerged, no longer measuring distances or calculating safety. Just 2 people who'd found where they fit perfectly, completely, here. The band played on, Dustpine danced on, and Samantha Bell, now Samantha Riggs, danced tallest of all, finally home in a place that didn't just make room for her but made her essential to its very fabric. The too tall seamstress had found where she belonged in a converted storage shed that had become a thriving business, in a small Wyoming town that had become a symbol of resistance, in the arms of a quiet horseman who'd seen her true from the very start. Some stories end with riding into sunsets. This one ended with staying put, with building up instead of moving on, with the radical act of claiming space in the world exactly as you are. And in Dustpine, Wyoming, as the summer of 1888 bloomed full and sweet, that was exactly tall enough. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Samantha and Colt's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please leave a comment below, and let's connect over our shared love of these frontier tales. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more listeners discover these tales of courage, love, and finding where you belong in the vast American frontier. Until next time, partners.